So I am talking today about diversity and open source. I want to introduce myself. I'm Coraline Ehmke. I've been a technologist, as you heard, for about 20 years. I'm an open source developer. I work in Ruby currently because Ruby is awesome sauce. And I have about 14 open source libraries to my name with combined downloads of about 100,000 users. If you're a web developer, here are all my vital stats. If you're into R, those are my vital stats. I find it a little hard to read, but that's R for you. Oh no. Let me see if that's my fault. Do you see ponies? Ah. How about now? All right. Cool. Thank you for pointing that out to me. So those are my vital stats in JSON. And for my joke, which is ruined now, that's my vital stats in R. Anyway, there are going to be hard questions ahead. We really have to ask ourselves who we are as a community and what it is that we want, and are we really committed to diversity? There's not going to be any math involved, so don't panic. Math is hard, so let's do some introspection instead. If you can panic a little bit if you want. All right, first, before we get started, I want to talk about what diversity means, because it can mean different things to different people. It comes in a lot of different forms, and it's also relative. A group of African-American women who are on a development team, that's not a diverse team. That's homogeneity. A person cannot be diverse. Only a group of people can be diverse, and that means having different people with different experiences and different backgrounds working together. So let's look at some forms of diversity. Race and ethnicity is probably the first thing that comes to mind when people talk about diversity, and that is a very important and very visible sort of form of diversity. Gender also comes to mind. Notice that there's more than one gender. There actually are more than two genders in the world, so that's something you should know about. If you're ignoring people of a different gender than you are, you're ignoring about half the population, which there's a lot of skills and experience and problem solving that you're not taking advantage of if you are an all-male team or an all-female team. Age is also pretty important. Almost everyone in this room is getting older, except for her, and I'm kind of mad at her for that. I can tell you that the world treats you differently as you get older. A lot of people ask, where are the 40-year-old developers? Well, most of them go into management, some of them go and write books, some of them maybe go and do keynote speeches at open source conferences. Socioeconomic status is another form of diversity. The skills that you need to thrive in a high social standing with comfortable standards of living are different from those that you need to really focus on survival and making ends meet. Both sets of skills are valuable, and they bring problem-solving skills to the table, but under very different circumstances. So it's good to recognize that there are differences there. Capability is another form of diversity that's very important. If you hold your R or Haskell meeting on a third floor of a walk-up, there are people whose insights and experiences you're not going to be able to tap into. Educational background is another one that's very important to me. I was an English major. I did one semester of CS and was really bored and was like, I'm never going to do this for a living. Switched to English and ended up dropping out. A lot of people with different backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, or even people who are self-taught have a lot to offer on a development team or on an open source team, not just CS majors. Most projects do not require CS majors. Most projects are not doing matrix math or vectors or writing compilers. Some of them are, and I'm happy that there are people who know how to do that. But most projects can benefit by a variety of educational experiences. Just quickly, any liberal arts majors in the audience? All right, they're all over here. That's very strange. They're clustering, and all of you are CS majors, right? Okay. Religion and spirituality provide a moral framework for a lot of people and decide and sort of advise people's decision making. One of the other interesting things about religion and spirituality is they provide a model for our relationship to the greater world. That sort of modeling can inform the way that we model problems in a problem domain. It can provide some different insight into how things are related to each other and how we relate to things as well. So that's a rich body of experiences. There are many, many, many other forms of diversity. These are just sort of the things I wanted to touch on really quickly. We can't talk about diversity and inclusivity without talking about privilege. And I'm not going to yell at anybody, and I'm not going to make anybody feel bad. I like to think of privilege sort of in role-playing terms, and that's because I'm an uber geek. Privileges that you start out with are sort of like the roles that you make when you're creating your character in a role-playing game. So being white, being born into a middle-class family, growing up in a first-world nation, being able-bodied, these are examples of privileges that people are just sort of born with. They're the baseline characteristics that you're born with. Other privileges you pick up along the way that are the result of attention, investment, effort, and frankly, luck. For example, having wealth is a privilege, but it's a privilege that some people focus really heavily on and are able to attain. There's nothing wrong with having privileges. Everyone has privileges. It doesn't mean that you didn't have to work for the things that you have. It just means that in some situations, you had advantages that helped you along. So to continue with the role-playing theme, if you're lucky enough to be a magic user, it would be really unfair for you to say to the fighter, you could throw fireballs if only you tried hard enough, right? That's a transmogrifier, which I think is pretty cool. I like the Calvin and Hobbes one, but I couldn't find a good picture for it. Privileges can be lost because we change over time. Youth is a privilege with an expiration date. In my case, I gave up 3 major privileges this year: appearing male, appearing cisgender, and appearing straight, to live my life in a way that felt more authentic to me. And absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the experience of losing those 3 very, very major privileges. So I'm very lucky in that I enjoyed male, white, straight privilege for the first half of my life. And now I'm seeing the other side of things and what it means to lose some of those privileges. Privilege is only a problem when you use it to hold people back. Assuming that everyone has had the same opportunities or can accomplish the same things with the same amount of effort. What's beautiful is seeing different people with different opportunities, different advantages, different interests and abilities coming together. It's like that adventuring party. You don't want all fighters, you don't want all mages, because that makes you weak. You want a variety of different people on your team. That makes the story really more interesting and helps us all move forward. So I want to talk about diversity now. And the commitment that it takes to actually create a diverse situation on your team or in your company. We're not magnets. People don't behave like magnets. Like attracts like. We seek out people who are like us, who have similar opinions to us, and we form very strong bonds with them. They're the people that we reach out to when we're putting a new team together. They're the people we reach out to when we're starting a new company or joining a new company. They're people in our network that we have natural connections with. You can reach out to people outside of your circle and outside of your comfort zone. Being open to people who are different from you is an important first step, but you actually need to broadcast signals that tell the world that you're open to interacting with people who are different from you. That can mean showing your willingness to listen to other people without judging or inserting yourself or your opinions in. Listening is probably the most important skill that you will have as a person who supports diversity and wants to make open source more inclusive. Different kind of signals you can also send. A lot of communities and events, and even open source projects, are signaling their openness through comprehensive codes of conduct. This conference that we're at today has a wonderful code of conduct. An effective code of conduct specifies the types of behavior that are expected, what constitutes unacceptable behavior, guidelines for reporting unacceptable behavior, and state the organizer's commitment to welcoming people of all types. The open source contributor covenant is being adopted now by about a dozen open source projects. And basically it says, we are open to contributions from people of all kinds, of all skill levels, and we're not gonna be jerks to them. And if we are jerks to them, we're gonna kick someone off the project team for not following the code of conduct that we have laid out. So that's a great way to signal that you are open, you are welcoming, and that you want contributions from lots of different people. The biggest team that's adopted this so far is the Angular JS team, which I was pretty excited about. I want to talk about culture. Startups talk about culture a lot, and I think they're kind of ruining the word. They talk about culture in terms of ping pong tables and after-hours drinking and catered lunches. Those aren't culture; those are spiffs. So culture comes down to values, and values are shared by expressing them, by acting on them, and by transmitting them to other people, new people who come into the community. If you have a value that you don't act on, It's a conceit. It's not a value. It's a form of self-deception. You're lying to yourself about who you are. Unless you are actually living and promoting the values that you hold, you are lying to yourself. So when you do have shared values that you hold on to very strongly, you tend to form communities around communities of people who share those same sorts of values. And from those communities, culture emerges. Related communities with shared values form cultures. So in this room, we probably have people who are Rubyists, and people who are Pythonistas, and people who are in various open source communities. Those communities are not the same, and they do have some distinct features as individual cultures, but together we're an OSS community. So in thinking about values, what are the values of the open source community? There are 4 that I've found in my research from opensource.com and from some other places. And the wording varied, but the ideas were always the same. We value the free exchange of ideas. We want everyone to contribute to the conversation about the things that need to be done and the problems that need to be solved. We want to collaborate with each other because we know that as a group, we are more capable than we are as individuals. We want everyone to feel a part of the projects that we work on. We want everyone to be an owner of the projects that they work on. And we want to value contributions from all people and judge them on their own merits. So I'd like to explore each of these values and see the intersection of the values with inclusivity and diversity. So starting with the free exchange of ideas. Language is really critical to creating an idea exchange that's inclusive. An open exchange can't happen without making people feel safe and welcome and certain that their voices will be heard. So the language we use in documentation, in comments, in feature requests, and throughout our projects send signals about whether or not we welcome people who are different from us. There was a great sort of informal, unscientific survey done by Julia Evans called Guys, 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 where she put together 8 or 10 questions using the word guys and asked women and men to gauge if those usages were gender neutral or not gender neutral. So in the first example, I just took 2. Hey guys, I just saw that a penguin escaped. Most people, men and women, agreed that that was a gender neutral usage of the term. But when you say something like, we need to hire a Python guy to deal with our penguin problem, twice as many men as women thought that that was gender neutral. So even though you may think that your language is exclusive, you may actually be excluding people by the gender terms that you're using. I did a quick survey of GitHub and searched for the word guys in repositories and found 745 examples. There were many more. That was just sort of a quick survey. So be aware and cognizant of the language that you're using. There was kind of a famous incident, and I don't want to point to the community, but someone found gendered language in documentation of a major open source project and corrected it and sent it a pull request. And it triggered a long, not quite a flame war, but pretty close to a flame war about how trivial that was and how unimportant it was. And about 10 times more effort was spent on saying why it was not important and why it was a waste of time than it would have taken to actually fold in the pull request. So those are the sorts of things that are actually happening in our communities that we may not be aware of, but that are very, very important. Success by collaboration, our second value. Groupthink is a real thing. When you're in a group of people who are very similar to you in background and skill set and experiences, you're going to tend to agree with one another and tend to value ideas that come from within your circle. So this is Solomon Asch. He was an American psychologist and a pioneer in social psychology. He's most well known for his conformity experiments, in which he demonstrated the effect of groupthink on opinions. He used these 2 cards. This was an experiment that was done in 1955. So the card on the left is a line, a vertical line, and the card on the right, there were variations of it, had 3 lines, and participants were asked to choose which of the 3 lines, A, B, or C, matched the line on the left-hand card. The experiment was conducted using 123 male participants who were told that they would be part of an experiment in visual judgment. And each participant was put into a group with 5 to 7 other people. The 5 to 7 other people were actually confederates of the experimenter, confederates of Asch, and they were told to sometimes answer correctly and sometimes answer incorrectly, and to agree with one another. These are the results of the impact of having given the wrong answer for the first 5 to 7 people, whether the person who answered last, who was the person who did not know what the experiment was actually about, how often did he agree with the group, even though it was really, really visually clear that he was giving the wrong answer? The larger the group, the more likely he was to agree with them, up to about 38% of the time, even when he knew consciously that the answer was wrong. Another study that was done by a few researchers at the Kellogg School of Management, this one was pretty interesting. They demonstrated that homogeneous groups felt more confident in their decision-making abilities. Diverse groups felt less confident, but were actually more effective. What they did was they took fraternity and sorority members and grouped them into groups of 3 or 4 and had them review the details of a fake murder investigation. About 5 minutes into the conversation, they would introduce someone else to the group. In some cases, someone who was a member of the same fraternity or sorority, and in some cases, someone from outside of that social circle. The presence of someone who was outside of their social circle increased their decision-making accuracy very, very significantly, whether or not the new person agreed with or disagreed with the consensus of the group already. So just having people present who are different from you will open you up to exploring different ideas, make you less likely to do a sort of knee-jerk agreement. So shared ownership is another one of our values that I want to talk about. Monoculture is an organizational smell. I would not want to work for a company where everyone was exactly the same. You shouldn't tolerate that on your open source teams either. Another problem we have in open source is benevolent dictatorships. That's also an anti-pattern. When you have one person acting as a gatekeeper, deciding what the software is going to look like and who's allowed to participate in it, that's going to lead to a situation where you're going to develop a monoculture and you're going to be beholden to one individual with less opportunity to actually contribute fully. When you give people personal responsibility, that leads to that sense of shared ownership that's so important to us. And our final value, valuing contributions. This does not work. Be excellent to each other is not a good way to run an organization or to run a project, because who decides what is and what is not excellent behavior? What are our norms and how are they expressed? Are they understood? Are they practiced? And what happens when they're violated? Being explicit about these things goes a long way. Sometimes we describe ourselves or our projects or our organizations as meritocracies. The idea is that since everyone is on equal footing, has equal access to tools and opportunities and information, we should be rewarded based on our contributions. The problem is that in reality, people do not start out on equal footing with equal access and with the same opportunities. Meritocracies reward people with extra privileges, earned or otherwise, and punish people who do not have those privileges. This can manifest as silencing people or reducing their opportunities to contribute. In all cases, it's a form of injustice, and it has serious consequences for real people. So this little illustration is talking about equality versus fairness. So imagine that there are 3 people who are reporters for a newspaper, and they've been asked to report on what's happening outside of the city walls. The organization they work for wants different opinions about what's happening so that they can present a more complete picture rather than one person's opinions. Which of those 3 people would you want to be? It's pretty clear that assuming equal footing is not a fair assumption, and the news that's going to be reported back to their organization is not going to reflect different viewpoints. So if instead we approach it from this scenario, where differences between the individuals are taken into consideration, differences that have nothing to do with their capabilities, their skills, or their experience, each person is given what they need to be successful. That's what we need to do in our communities and our projects, is give every person the tools that they need to be as successful as they possibly can be. So as a community, we have to decide kind of who we are and what we're doing. Do we want to express and live and transmit our commitment to diversity, our commitment to inclusivity? What are our core values? This is something we should be asking ourselves all the time. How do we practice these values? How do we put them into effect? How do we make an impact on the world based on what we believe in? How do we transmit them to people who are new to our community? If we do nothing, very, very little of the culture that we've worked so hard over the past 30, 40 years to develop, very little of that is going to naturally reemerge as new people enter our field. So the real question is, who do we want to be? Who do we want to present to the world as ourselves, as our true selves, as our authentic selves, and how are we going to get there? That's all I have, but I would very much like you to discuss and think about in the days ahead who you want to be and how you're making that happen, and who you want this community to be and how you're going to make that happen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I've really appreciated it. Thank you all so much.